Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schmaedeke, and today we are brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They have been serving Denver residents for 50 years. They are the proud sponsor of this podcast and of the Colorado Avalanche, which we are talking today about with Kyle Fredrickson. Kyle, live from Family Sports. How are you today?
Doing well, doing well. Avs pushback practice about 15 minutes, but even more time to talk about them, right? There was a quite a win last night, and I think a bright spot in the season if you really look at it during the whole.
Yeah, there's plenty of news kind of circulating the Avs right now. Like you said, big win over the Stars last night, 5-1. What did you see from the win? A pretty dominating performance. They give up that first goal and then nothing after that.
Yeah, I think when you look at how Jared Bednar wants this team to play, especially against some of the league's very best teams. I mean, that's the exact blueprint, right? I mean, any night that you get 2 goals out of your fourth line,
Right.
which is what happened with Kiviranta and Cogliano, it's just going to make a world of difference. It shows the Avs are capable of rolling 4 lines deep when everyone is humming. And more than anything, it was a night where, Georgiev being brilliant almost felt like a side story, right? It wasn't the main thing, but he was great. A 1 goal against a pretty high powered Stars team. I will say we got to put the caveat out there. Stars playing on the second of back-to-back nights at elevation, but they hopped out on the Avs quick, right? I mean, their first shot on goal within a minute of that game, the Stars have a 1-0 lead. And so to see this team not panic in that moment, have the maturity to kind of settle after that. Really impressive to me in the way that really going into the third period, there was no doubt that they were in control of this game and they were able to just really coast to the end. So really a lot to like. And when you look at the standings, I think that's where it's the most significant right now because, I mean, there's only 22 games left, if you can believe that.
Yeah, they're 2 points behind Dallas and Winnipeg at the Avs are 77 points. They're at 79. Real quick before we jump too deep into the standings, Nathan MacKinnon, another 2 points in one game. Yeah.
Right. I should at least say Nathan MacKinnon's name, right? But no, you're right. I think it goes without saying that I think last night was one of his best games, just from a checking standpoint, and that's what Jared Bednar told us post game. And so much of what the Avs do offensively is created by their defense, and that's that's no trick there. That's just pretty simple hockey. But when you see the Avs execute in that way with MacKinnon making the gritty kind of mean plays, that's another sign that, the Avs are at least in a healthy spot for one night. And, it's tough for us because we're kind of running out of ways to ask the team and Jared about this home point streak, right? Because how many different ways can you talk about MacKinnon's brilliance? But, it's the second longest one to start a season since Gretzky, in the 80s when, he did 1 point in every home game, 40 games. That's pretty incredible. So, yeah, MacKinnon is still doing his thing. And, I think in the last podcast, I was like, oh, is he out of the Hart Trophy race?
Yeah.
Well, we saw last night, he's right in the thick of it. I mean, plenty of games left here. He is going to have to finish strong. Let's see if the Avs can, carry some of this momentum into the road trip here.
It's becoming hard to talk about him because he's just great every night. And on Thursday, I'm going to talk with our colleague Vinny about the Nuggets, and I don't even know how to talk about Jokic anymore. And I feel like MacKinnon's that same level.
Yeah, it's true. And the one unfortunate thing is Nate is himself, but he's not super open with the media, kind of like Jokic, right?
Yeah,
it seems like we're always a little bit at a distance. Nate did a really great podcast with Elliot Friedman and the TSN guys recently, where you talked for close to an hour and they really dug into personal stuff. But when you try to follow that up from the local media standpoint, he just basically doesn't want to talk about it. So he's an enigma in that way, but I really do think that it's meaningful for him to be in the Hart Trophy conversation this late in the year. It's not the first time that it's happened for him. But if he was able to get over the hump and be MVP, it would be a pretty incredible thing to witness. And, like Jokic, every night it just seems like he's doing something phenomenal.
So let's talk about the Central Division standings. Like I said, the Avs are 2 points behind Winnipeg and Dallas. Jared Bednar was asked a question about how important the Central Division is. What was kind of his response, and how do you kind of look at that for the Avs?
Yeah, well, I was kind of prompted to ask that question at morning skate because it felt like Michael Malone talking about the Nuggets saying, we don't have to win the division. Like it created a lot of headlines, right? Because
Yes, it
I
did.
don't think there's a lot of coaches who would be that blunt and honest about kind of what their team goals are. Switch it to Bednar, it was much more of a sweet and short response, and but also honest in the same way, and saying that, yeah, like we know why we'd want to take first in the division and have home ice. Like that's a no-brainer. But they're not gonna like, kill themselves to do it. And he wouldn't say it exactly, but that kind of felt like what they did last year in winning the Central, right? They went on this tear to end the year and they claimed the division. But by the time they played the Kraken, maybe they were out of gas a little bit. So I do think that there's some priorities that the Abs have to consider in all of this, but they're getting healthier. You're not going to tell Nathan McKinnon to like slow down.
Right.
You're not going to tell those guys that home ice doesn't matter to them. And the team has been so much better at home, right? I mean, that's something that we've talked about as well, but this just hasn't been a great road team. So when you have that security of being at Ball Arena where they're proven to be a better team this year, I think it means a lot. And, when you look at Winnipeg and Dallas, both good teams, Sean Monahan going to the Jets is maybe the biggest move of free agency that so far that's worked out well. He's produced very well for them so far. But we'll see. The Avs are still right in the thick of it, and with the looming possibility that Val Nichushkin comes back would make a huge difference, and we'll get to that in a minute in the pod. But the Avs should like where they're at, and on the whole, they're healthy, right? Last year it was like, man, how are they doing this? How are they getting by with the skeleton roster? Well, for the most part, everyone's is playing who's available, and it's not a perfect team. There's certainly some holes. But last night showed us that when the strengths of this team are clicking, it's going to be really hard to beat them.
Well, I was going to say this team is deeper than last year's team. Last year's team, would you say that? I mean,
I think that's a fair observation. It's a good comparison to make. I think the depth of this team hasn't been tested like the depth of last year's team, right? Like we haven't seen guys like, Ben Myers and some of these other folks with the Eagles
yeah.
having to play meaningful minutes. And that's because the roster has been healthier. But I do think that the Avs have made some good additions. Zach Parise had a few mental errors last night. He had one bad turnover that almost led to a goal, but he's been a real savvy veteran addition. They really like Chris Wagner playing that fourth line center role. He was a journeyman who got hurt right before training camp, but he's, back healthy. So I am really curious to see how some of those pieces play into their success down the run here. Cause yeah, the way that, Cogliano is producing, I don't have his numbers in front of me, but, I think he's got, maybe 5 points in the last 7 games or something like that. That's huge for this team because it really kind of spreads out the production. It allows McKinnon to have at least, average nights by his standards,
Right.
and the Avs can still win. So I do think that there are some in-depth improvements from a year ago. I think that there's probably more to come before the trade deadline, and we can get into that later as well.
So the Avs have Dallas and Winnipeg one time each in the last 22, and both at home.
Yeah.
So, that's a key. All right, so let's talk about Val Nichushkin being back on the ice for practice.
Yeah.
Is not playing yet. He's out of the assistance program for now. This is huge for the Avs, and it also, and again, we are very hopeful that Val got the help he needed.
Sure. It is. And, just to see him out skating with the team, he's in the locker room with the guys, always with a PR professional from the team standing nearby to make sure no one bothers him. But yeah, it's great for Val to be progressing to a point just in his life where he's ready to play hockey again, right? That was the first concern. But yeah, it goes without saying that he totally changes the complexity of this roster. I mean, they're a losing team without him, and they're a winning team with him based on percentages of when he's been in and out of the lineup this year. So we'll see when it happens. Bednar was on his radio show this morning as we record this podcast before practice, to where Bednar said the intention is to get him back in one of these home games after the road trip here. They go to Chicago and Nashville before returning home. So that's no real surprise. It's an optimistic timeline, I think, mostly just because here's a guy who's been away from the team for 40 plus days, right? I don't think you can just necessarily hop right back on the ice and expect to be ready to go. But that being said, we don't know a lot about the specifics of Val's care, right? Like I'm assuming he had some access to ice or at least workout equipment to stay in shape, because based on how long he's been practicing with the team, which is less than a week, they already expect him to be back pretty soon. So I would expect his intensity to ramp up while the abs are gone. I think Jared said that, probably be 2-a-days for Val being on the ice and just getting that conditioning right. But we'll see how long it takes for him to maybe become a real impact. Because, when Val's at his best, he's skating hard and angry and he's using, all that huge frame of his to make a difference. And he's got to be 100% to make that happen. So, for me and our end reporting on this, it's been tough because, Val doesn't want to talk. The team isn't going to give us specifics about what happened, but I have been doing my research on the NHLPA and learning about this program. And I'll have a story in Sunday's paper that just examines a little bit, what the NHLPA does for players and how the Avs have taken it, to their advantage. And it's not always the right fit for players too. I talked to Jonathan Drouin. He was in Montreal a few years ago and he took a leave of absence for some mental health issues, but he decided the program wasn't the best fit for him, right? Like he went outside of that. And he felt like that was the right path for him and he got help. So it's interesting that, it's not a one size fits all model. But I do think a modern sports league needs to be upfront about the mental health challenges of being a pro athlete and also giving them their resources, being proactive too, right? Like there needs to be some education for players so they know they can get help before it gets so serious that, they have to leave the team.
Where does Val slide in then on the lines, do you think? I mean, he's been gone for,
That's
like you said, 40 days is a long time.
Yeah, my guess is that they'll plug him in, on the second line. It
Yeah.
would be my guess. It's interesting because they don't have that true second line center, and with Val in the lineup, it makes sense to have Johansson and maybe Arturi Lehkonen flanking him, just because you're putting two really talented, hardworking players around Johansson. Maybe that elevates his game. But I don't know. There's nights where Val's the best player on the ice, and they need him on the top line. And man, when you have, Rantanen, McKinnon, Nichushkin, all those guys playing together and they're all at the top of their game. I mean, I think that's got to be one of the most feared lines in the NHL. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they do plug him into the third line to just get him a little bit of ice time to break him in when he returns. But they need Val at full strength and playing in the top six if they have any hope of going beyond one round in the playoffs.
This quick little 2-game road trip won't be the easiest. Nashville's been playing pretty well. I think they've won 6 straight. Chicago is not great, but it's a quick and for a team that's 13-13 on the road, it's important for them to get some momentum on the road.
Yeah, I do think it's important that they come out against the Blackhawks and play that same brand of hockey we saw last night, right? Like if they come out flat against a rebuilding team, Connor Bedard is probably going to have some wacky highlight goal or awesome moment, but you can't, win every hockey game with just that going on. So I am intrigued because if they do come out flat, I think there's real concerns that this is just sort of a elongated stretch of poor play since the All-Star break. I think it was 3-5-2 in 10 games since the break. And that's just, not what we've come to expect from this team, even one that's as streaky as these guys are. So going to the Predators as well, they're still kind of fighting to stay in that playoff conversation. If they continue to be hot and if the Avs continue to flounder, hey, more motivation on their part to try to make a late run here for a playoff push.
Nashville is 500 at home, which is kind of weird. They're 15-15 and they're 15-15. That's it. No overtime losses, nothing. Just 15-15 straight up.
I don't know. I think these guys play too many games, right? It's just hard to decipher what the heck's going on with home and road splits, and teams are just tired. It's a long season. Guys are playing hurt. It's all just madness.
These seasons are a grind. That is for sure. So trade deadline is approaching. The hockey one just seems really late. I don't know if I'm just crazy, but so it's March. What is it? March
8th. So we're coming
8th.
up on it. Yeah. So a little over a week away. Yeah, it doesn't get the same hype as the NBA trade deadline. I think that's just a marketing problem in general if you're going to compare the leagues.
Because the NHL trade deadline is insane. People go, there are a lot of trades on the trade deadline.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it'll go all the way up, to March 8th for sure. And I wrote a few, I guess maybe just a week or so ago about 5 players the Avs might be interested. And for me, Adam Henrique still has to be at the top as a guy from the Anaheim Ducks who's a legit second line center. He's still a rental. He's 34 years old. But he's a 20 goal scorer who's got, great hockey IQ. And I think he would be an excellent complement, to that combination that I talked about before with Val Nichushkin and Arturi Lehkonen, just a solid high IQ player. And then that allows, Ryan Johansson to flourish as a third or fourth line guy to where, he has shown a lot better effort recently. I do think that he's kind of figured out his role in the system, and, maybe he doesn't quite have the speed to sort of keep up with the Avs need him to do right now. But if he can be productive in a bottom six role, if they add that, that's huge. And I think my hot take right now is I don't think they need goalie help, Chris. Am I crazy for saying that?
I don't know. You and I were talking before I recorded about some people think they do need goalie help, some people don't. Gorgiev was outstanding last night.
Yeah, outstanding with rest, right? Because they
yes.
played Annunen a little bit more.
Yeah, so I mean, I think so. They have, what'd you say, 22 games left? Is that what you said?
Yep.
How many is Gorgiev playing? 18, 17,
yeah.
probably?
Right.
So, I mean, I think what they have at goalie right now is probably good. But what do you think to get a caliber of player that they may, they need at this deadline? What are they giving up?
Yeah, it's a good question. The Bo Byram has been the guy who's sort of been part of that conversation.
Coming up, right?
He does, but there would have to be some salary figuring out, how it's going to work in exchange for a guy like Henrique. But I do think that the Avs have enough depth with Sam Malinsky down with the Eagles that they'd feel comfortable doing that. The problem is Bo Byram has played a lot better recently. Yeah. It almost feels like he's found his rhythm again. He's playing with Jack Johnson and has been a better player. So you could look at that in one of two ways. Well, that's great for Bo. He's, going to be playing well as they enter the playoffs. Or, hey, that's great for Chris McFarland because now his value is going up because he's showing other teams, maybe another contending team, if it's not the Ducks, that could be a piece that they need, like a Cale Makar light, a guy who creates a lot of offense and is a great skater as a defender. But I do think it's going to take, either a current player who's a Byram-esque or a first round pick. And, the Avs have been a little light on those with some of the moves they made before the deadline to win the cup. Arturi Lehkonen was a trade deadline guy who pushed this team over the edge. You just wonder, is Adam Henrique, that level of player who's actually going to make that big of a difference? That's sort of the decision that we're going to have to see out of McFarland over here over the next 10 days or so. And also their level of belief in Gabe Landeskog coming back, right? Like I'm peering out over the ice here just to see if he's practicing yet, but he has been out with the team before a lot of these skates, and it feels like his movement and just his skating is increased more and more as we've watched him. So that's always the wild card, right? I mean, I've said earlier on this podcast that I think it's optimistic that he's back in later rounds, just because I do think there needs to be a pretty big ramp up to being a full participant in practice before he can actually make a difference in games. But that has to impact their view of the trade deadline in some sense, because if you're going to give up a first round draft pick to acquire a second line center, it means that you think you're making a deep playoff run. And if you're making a deep playoff run, that's when I think Gabe Landeskog could be available. So, it's chess, not checkers. And, I'm not smart enough to be an NHL GM myself. But I do think there's a lot of tough decisions ahead for McFarland on what he wants to do with just a ton of factors swirling around.
We've talked about the Gabe Landeskog possibly coming back thing on previous podcasts. I just don't do it. I just think that I just don't think it's worth the risk. This guy, I mean, what is his contract through? Like 2030 with the Avs or something like that? I mean, these guys are here for the long haul. This team is locked up for the future. And I
would agree. I'm just thinking as you say that, the one thing that comes to mind for me, and it'd be a great question for Jared or Gabe as we get closer to him coming back, is like, is there possible for re-injury, right?
Yes.
Like could he come back too soon? Because if that's the case, then you're absolutely right. Like the Avs would just be fools to try to rush him back in for a playoff series if there's any chance that he's not ready to go. I don't know if that's the nature of this sort of injury. Like, is this an issue? Once you're all, tied up after surgery, do you just have to get better and then just see how it reacts? I think that could be more where the Avs optimism is stemming from, just based on like the pure timeline. But yeah, they shouldn't rush him back,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I think he's signed through the team, through like 2026 or seven, just on the top of my head. All these guys are signed pretty much through this core player group. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but just to see him make that incremental improvement as we watch, before skates has been really nice. But yeah, there's no doubt the team would be foolish to try to put him in a situation where he risks his long-term future.
And I think that's really kudos to the Avs front office. Joe Sakic, Chris McFarland, Coach Bednar. They're not one of these teams that's like, oh man, we got one of these guys on an expiring contract. We got to trade him. There's nobody on this team that the Avs are like, oh my God, we have to trade because we're not going to re-sign him. These guys are locked up.
Yeah, it's a good point. There aren't any like albatross contracts on
Yes.
this roster right now, and that is a credit to their championship window being right now. And I think that's where some of the urgency might come, is to say, hey, this is when these guys are in their prime. They're locked on their deals. There's no drama about what their next contract looks like yet. That's when you want to be competing for championships, and that's why I think there might be some frustration from Avs fans from saying like, you don't get McKinnon before he turns 30 for that long. I think he's about to turn 29, and that's not to say that his game is going to experience some dip. He's only gotten better and better. But yeah, the Avs window is right now, and at some point maybe that's the case. Maybe we're talking about, oh man, they really need more out of Mikko, but he's just kind of getting a little bit old, right? Like,
Right.
we're not saying that, because even on off nights, like Mikko is one of the better power forwards in this league. So we'll see what happens. That'll also speak to the decisions that are made before the trade deadline, because the Avs aren't going to, take on some wild contract or do something that's going to leverage the long-term future of the team. I think even, the Ryan Johansson contract, they're on the hook for $4 million, but at least Nashville's paying half of that. They're eating half that contract. So, they've made good moves to avoid those situations. But we'll see. It's just tough, right now. That second line center market is pretty thinned out, but the price tag has kind of stayed the same. And that's a tough spot to be in as a GM.
Team building is such a skill. It's really amazing. Like you said, like, you're not smart enough. I'm not smart enough to be a GM in any sport either. These guys, and trust me, there's some bad people at it. I think we
right, sure.
We can all say that, but we're pretty lucky here with the Avs. They have done some great team building, and with their trade deadline, I remember the Cup year, like, they were making moves like a week before, weren't they?
Yeah, I think that I'm trying to look back.
They got Josh Manson early.
It was. I was going to say Manson and Lehkonen were the big pickups. I think Nico Sturm was another depth forward guy, who was part of that group. But yeah, they were aggressive because I think they knew what they had, right? And that's a credit to McFarland and Sakic at that point, when he was really making the decisions of finding the right fits and being aggressive when it's your year. That team was so stacked. You talk about depth. It's just incredible, the fact that they were able to be so productive up and down the lineup. I'm going to Calgary in a week or so here, and to see Nazem Kadri again will be nice. But that's just, that's your ultimate second line center, especially a few years ago.
Yeah.
He truly was in his prime. That team was built to win it all, and they found the pieces on the fringe and guys who are maybe undervalued on other teams to play in bigger roles. And that's the biggest part of, I think, this for the Avalanche, and why they can be successful in free agency is, who wouldn't want to play for this team, right? Like, if you're a role player and you see what these guys have, and McKinnon and Makar and the rest of the squad, and just kind of the culture that the Avalanche has, it sure seems to me like it's an appealing option for players outside of this practice facility, I will add, which I'm sitting in. That honestly might be one of the biggest deterrents for playing for this team. But if you can get over that, and you don't mind living in this Centennial area and, playing in a glorified kids hockey rink for a lot of your practices, I could see why guys would want to play for the Avs. And it's a great way for the Avs to market themselves without having to do a whole lot, right? Hey, we won a cup. We have McKinnon, come be part of this. Now, that's not going to, sweeten the deal so much where it's going to take less than a first round pick to get an impact player, but it does put a lot in the Avs' favor. And it speaks to what you just talked about. There aren't a bunch of albatross contracts, guys who are upset and want out. I mean, the last guy to do that was Matt Duchene, and, he's been hopping teams ever since.
And that trade turned out all right. I think.
I think that worked out for the Avs. Yeah, I would say.
They also got Cogliano at that trade deadline.
That's right. Yeah.
I was like, didn't they get him too?
Yeah. And talk about guys who are just ultimately respected in this league. I think he's over 1,200 games played at this point. And I will be curious to see if he continues being like a scoring presence on that fourth line, because it's not what we expect out of him. I mean, he's got 6 goals and 12 assists on the year. But you look over the past 2 games, he's got 2 goals and an assist. So, he's playing really well and in a rhythm, and just, making good decisions with a revolving door of line mates. And that's where I give Cogliano credit. He's a fourth liner, a grinder who just kind of accepts every new guy who rolls in and out of there. Cause, that's really where we've seen that turnover with the AHL call-up guys.
I just looked up Cogliano and I forgot that he had a broken hand in the finals that year and played.
Yeah.
Those guys are they're so tough. Anyway.
Yeah, they're insane.
All right, Kyle, thanks for coming on and talking with me. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple and on Spotify. You can get all of Kyle's Avs coverage on denvergazette.com. He is going to go watch the Avs practice right now. So, Kyle, thanks for coming on, and we will talk to you probably next week.
Absolutely.